Fare of the Free Child is a weekly podcast that centers
diverse narratives, insightful commentary,
learning with our children and deschooling ourselves,
owning our multiple identities and treating children with dignity,
creating community and sharing conversation from often silenced spaces,
breathing life into liberation practices proactively and on purpose.
It's about parenting. It's about self-directed education, loving. It's about learning, liberatory practices,
defining love for ourselves and giving our love to as much of the world as it can possibly contain.
Let's find each other. Let's support each other. All of these stories are important and should be shared.
All right, so on this podcast, y'all know we talk about liberation through self-directed education. And from what I know about Kaylin's story, it is very much about directing her own path, going against the norm, to embrace her own grain, and really to design a liberatory practice that I think is outside of the norm in terms of corporate America, the standard American dream. So I'm really, really happy that I reached out to Kaylin and she said yes. Kaylin is a writer, a mother, a wife, and an African-American living in Africa, as her blog is titled. Kaylin, welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this segment of the podcast.
Thank you so much, Akilah. It's an honor to be on your awesome platform, so thank you.
You're very welcome. And so we started talking already. We were just like getting into it. I was like, oh, let me hit record. But can you give us a little bit more? Tell us about what you primarily write about on your blog and sort of like how you got to this space?
Sure. I am African American and I am based in Namibia, which is just above South Africa. And I've been here for about the last 6 years. I first came as a volunteer teacher teaching Namibian high school students. And then I ended up meeting my husband, who's Namibian, and we got married in 2014. And now we have a 22-month-old son. And in terms of professionally, what I do right now, I freelance write. That's like one thing that I do. And then, for the past couple of years, I also created my own website or blog, I guess you could call it, titled African American in Africa. And it's basically a web platform that chronicles the experiences of African Americans living across the African continent. And so I interview other African Americans living in Africa. I write my own reflections. I studied journalism at Howard, so it's kind of, my... Oh, exactly.
Yeah, I went to Clark, Atlanta.
Awesome. Yeah, there you go. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of in line with what I studied. That's pretty much my story. I freelance write and I also, work from home. So I am staying home with my son, who is still, just 1 year old. And so, yeah, that's me.
And that's plenty. That's plenty. Thank you. And as I mentioned, one of the things that I discovered Kaylin's blog maybe a year ago, I think, maybe even a little bit less. And I just went through like so many of the blog posts and then I found the Facebook page and it's such a beautiful resource. I'm so grateful that you made the time to do that. Yes, because this is our first time visiting the continent and you've kind of been like just kind of my helper along the way, even though I didn't reach out until now. Yeah, totally. Right. Because of course you have the varied perceptions and perspectives about Africa. Very similar thing. We've been digital nomads for almost 7 years. And when we decided, we were based in Atlanta, and when we decided to start going back to Jamaica, where we're from, but we left as children. I was 10 and my husband, Chris, was maybe like 7 or 8. And everybody's like, oh, God, it's not safe. And, you hear all of the things. But we've gone for many years and we've had no issues. I mean, nothing outside of the norm and things that we've had far more drama in Georgia than we did in Jamaica, whether we were in Kingston or Falmouth or wherever. And I think that that's one of the things that drew me to your story, because you come from, in a sense, sort of a traditional background and you did all the checklist correct things and you went to college and, you really could have gone deeper into the American dream. But you decided to design a path that was liberatory for you. And then you moved and, you followed this path and now you're living there. And as you write about, it isn't like easy street all day, but it is very much in alignment with who and how you are and how you want to show up in the world. And I wanted to share that because a lot of us are so afraid to do that. So Kaylin, for you, what made that shift something that you could no longer ignore? What made you say, you know what, I am going to leave this great job or whatever, and I'm going to explore this thing despite all of the, the naysayers and the doubt, I'm sure.
Right. So, I went to college in Washington, D.C. And, right after that, I was basically working in broadcast news, which interesting in, because it sort of exposed me to a lot of like current events and international, happenings and just what was going on around the world, just, by the nature of working in that, in broadcast television.
Yeah.
But I also, like at the tender age of about 21 or 22, really started, just noticing all of the isms of corporate America. And, that really started to turn me off, like I was a pretty bright, like employee and things like that. But I noticed, a lot of like unsavory things that were going on, like when it was like me versus like a lot of my white coworkers around my age who weren't necessarily working as hard, but, really like with that like sort of good old boys club, I guess you could call it, like network, they would just be like pushed to the top, like whatever. So I really became disenchanted early on. And when I was 23, still working in broadcast news in Washington, D.C., my mother passed away completely out of the blue, and it sort of coincided with a trip that I was getting ready to take to the Caribbean, to Barbados, which is where my mother's side of the family is from. My friend and I had planned a trip. So my mother passed away, but we, rescheduled our trip and we went to Barbados. And it was definitely, needed for me. And we just had a complete blast. And that really like changed the game for my life. It just changed the entire trajectory. I fell in love with like just the energy of being in a Black country, the warm weather, the people, the culture. And, it's like I came back home 2.5 weeks later and like everything had changed and I just couldn't get moving outside of the country. I was just totally over where I was working and everything. And so that kind of like kicked off my interest in living overseas. I ended up living in Barbados because my grandmother was actually living there as well. She had retired there. I ended up going back and spending like about 1.5 years. Then I had to return back to the U.S., but still living abroad in a Black nation was always on my mind. And so, I would say in 2010, I finally, after doing a lot of research, I basically applied and got accepted to a program called World Teach. And that gave me the opportunity to live abroad in an African nation here in Namibia. And so I went with that program. And that's how I, basically ended up here. So for me, it was just like, I think it's just my mother, just the way she raised me and the mindset that she instilled in me has always, been just to sort of go above being average. And, she just raised me that way. And so I always, so I wasn't really that afraid of, stepping outside of of the norm, I guess you could say. And it's just something in me that I really went with what I wanted to do, and I wasn't nervous about, being away from home and things like that. Like I know a lot of people think about that, when it comes to like, moving outside of the country, they say they could never imagine leaving their family and things like that. But at the time, I really didn't have any of those feelings. Like I was just like, just ready to go. And so, I guess that spirit, and maybe it's a little bit genetic. I don't know, like my my grandmother, the one that retired and moved to Barbados, yes, her parents were from there, but she she was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and worked as an RN. And, but she also kind of had that travel bug. And as soon as she retired, she like sold her brownstone in Brooklyn and moved to Barbados. You know what I mean? Yeah. So like, I think it's kind of like, just kind of what I've seen and maybe a little bit of genetics. I don't know, like just some
a good
dynamic
combination all around. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, that's kind of like just my background and how I ended up coming here, regardless of, most of my friends none of my friends were moving abroad or anything like that back when I first
anything
came.
crazy like that, right? Quote unquote.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love that. I love that you also are,
Oops.
that's okay. I love that you're
Sorry
also honoring the women in your life, and the impact and the influence that they had in that way, because very similar thing. My mother, I think of all her siblings, she's definitely the adventurer. My mom will be like,
Right.
instead of painting the walls, I go and move. I'm just gonna move
Right.
to somewhere else. Like, and she's
Exactly.
always been
Exactly.
that way. Yeah. So
Exactly.
I also don't have that fear of change at all.
Right.
Crave it at times. And then I
Yeah.
also becoming a parent, becoming a mother really just got me charged up about liberatory
Hmm.
living and altogether. I talk a lot about raising free people, and I also include myself in that. How do I
Right.
continue to feel uplifted and like I am uplifting people
Hmm.
and spaces that are not heard, which is the other aspect of what I love so much about what you're doing, Kayla. And I saw what prompted me to reach out finally was that you posted something about Black businesses in Namibia. You were
Hmm.
mentioning how, like, very similar to what I'm seeing here in Johannesburg, and I've only been in
Yeah.
Johannesburg, so I can only speak to my limited knowledge. And I've only
Hmm.
been here, we've been here for like, what, I don't know, 3 weeks or so, maybe a month.
Hmm.
That still it's the descendants of the colonizers who are in
Right.
power primarily. And you mentioned a
Right.
similar thing with Namibia. And so I love that
Yeah.
you said, because we're going to take a trip there for sure. So I love that
Hmm.
you're like, this is where you go. You go to this village
Right.
for beef. And this
Exactly.
is, like that was just so helpful. So that's one of the resources I want to make sure that I share on the blog. But why does that even matter? Why does that matter to you, Kaylin, that we are aware of Black owned businesses and movements that are happening on the continent?
Well, number one, the first problem that I see is that African travel and the topic of African travel is very much like dominated by like white European perspectives and voices. And even in Africa, like in many countries, a lot of the hotels are owned by, whites, who have just had this leg up in a nation, because of colonialism.
Yep.
And so it's always, to me, interesting when I page through like travel guides for Namibia, for example, like I can just tell that they're written from like white perspectives, and they usually just sort of, touch the surface of the real, experience of,
Yeah.
this country. You know what I mean? Like they have a lot of emphasis on like very touristy things, like safaris. And I mean, safaris are, they're great, but there's so much more obviously to a country and the people, than just animals or like sightseeing, like in terms of, just like geography and things like that.
Right.
So, I through my years here, especially, I think I've obviously had like a bit of a deeper insight because I'm also Black. Like I've had deeper experiences. You know what I mean? There's definitely something to be said for being a an African American or someone of African descent and your experience on the continent. We are sort of like I think not automatically, but a lot like it's a lot easier for us to I think immerse ourselves a bit deeper into an
Yes. I
African
know exactly what you're saying.
society. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so just because of my own background and my own interests, like I've really seen that like the narrative as it pertains to tourism and things like that, and experiencing Namibia is so whitewashed, I would say. And I've had many great opportunities and just like really gotten a chance to interact with the different tribes of this country. And so I wrote an article on my blog, about ways to support, ways that you can experience this country, and really, being or interacting at a much deeper level than just the surface level tourism. And of course, it's important to support, the Black population of this country. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, the government is Black, but most of this country, most of the Black people are, really struggling financially, living paycheck to paycheck, or can't even, or struggling with unemployment and things like that.
Yeah.
And so I, obviously identify with, with trying to better or wanting better for, for Black Namibians. And so, if anybody is to visit this country, just try not to get too caught up in supporting white establishments. Just like in South Africa, white Namibians, as they're called, really have a leg up financially because of just their of colonialism and things like that. And
Yeah.
so it's really important to step outside of all of that and dig a bit deeper in terms of visiting the country, just so that you can support and help the local population.
Yes, wonderful. And no longer are we going to be able to use the excuse of not knowing because it
Right,
can be
right,
hard to find. Very similar thing with Jamaica.
right,
When we
right,
first started going back, we were going to Sandals resorts and, doing
right,
all of
right,
the things that were owned by whites and Chinese, but not
right.
realizing, oh, now we know to make sure that we're looking for our people in that way and supporting.
Exactly.
And
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
yeah, and so that's why I love that you did that. So I am going to put that on the show notes page for this episode as well. And
Got it.
also, I'll be taking advantage of, she does consultations. So you can call, if it's an hour or 30 minutes, which I think is brilliant and such a wonderful thing to offer because you've been
Mhm.
there and you can
Right,
give that perspective and you can answer specific questions and you can
right,
dispel myths and affirm things or
right,
say when you don't know. That's
right,
that's really important. We don't have, what you're doing is offering us access in a way
right.
that's really, really important. And I have the benefit of knowing someone here as well, an unschooler,
Mhm,
a South African of Indian descent, so a brown woman,
mhm,
who's really
mhm.
just kind of helped us with certain perspectives and just the
Nice.
reality of it. Yeah, and also knowing some folks from Lesotho who can really tell us what's good and how to support
Right.
our own. So I really love that you're doing that. And then the
Thank
other
you.
thing that I love, Kaylin, is how you mentioned, as I was telling you, that I read a recent blog post where you were saying your son, who he's
Hmm.
not even 2 yet, and you were
Right.
talking about some of the not so wonderful sides of being in Namibia, is that you grew
Right.
up in New York and Manhattan is close to where you grew up. So you went to museums and you did all the
Right.
things and you were
Right.
thinking, man, my son should, this is probably what, he needs too. But then
Right.
realizing like he loves being outside, maybe chasing chickens or, just
Right.
doing
Right.
like fun things so that I couldn't leave without addressing that part too, because so much
Mhm.
of what we talk about in terms of like raising free people is to
Right.
understand the difference between um, on knowing what you want for your child or wanting the best for your child, but also
Right.
not having this vicarious idea or that they
Mhm.
are this extension of you, that whatever you thought was good, they would think. It's to really
Right.
observe and watch and see what's good for them. So
Exactly.
yes, I love that you brought that up too. So how is that going now as you just sort of continue to navigate? I know it's pretty much brand new because he's kind of brand new.
Right.
How are you
Right.
navigating
Right.
that space?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is the third town that I've lived in over the 6 years that I've been in Namibia. And I've lived in the capital city before. I lived in an even smaller town before. But this town has presented some, unique challenges, I would say, for me. There is like a significant white population. That's, one of the things. And, with that definitely comes some, I would say racism and prejudiceness, definitely.
Mm,
And, as an African American, at least, it's just, Namibians seem to sort of, they're a bit more passive a lot of the times than maybe like we are, I think, than African Americans are. So that has been challenging for me in this particular town. And then it's a small town, and there really isn't much for me to do at all. And there isn't, much in my eyes, for my son to do.
mm.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That's been my struggle, I would say, over the last, since like the last 21 months. That's how old my son is. And so, yeah, it's been challenging because, the way I was raised, my mother, like I was saying, it was such a dynamic mother, such a dynamic hands-on parent. She really, she stayed at home, she didn't work while she was raising my brother and I, and she really just crafted like such an amazing like upbringing, like now that I'm a parent, like I can seriously like even more so like appreciate it.
Yeah, it does
She really went
that.
up. Exactly. So she really went like above and beyond, and so yeah, like I grew up, going into the city to, see Broadway shows, and I was, enrolled in different organizations, and I mean, she just made such an amazing like childhood for my brother and I. And that's kind of what I'm used to. And also just through social media, I see other Black parents, that are in the US, and they've got their kid doing this and that and involved in all these things. And I don't have like any of these like options, like
Yeah.
available to me. And so, there have been times where I felt like my son was missing out on something, but like, of course, all in all, like it's really forced me to, yeah, separate myself and my upbringing, from his, and this is all a learning process, this
Sure.
parenthood. like really
And it never
teaches you a
ends.
lot.
It doesn't. My girls are
Exactly.
13 and 11, and I'm still like,
Wow.
oh,
Yeah.
word. Things are
Right.
still like brand new for me. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. But
Yeah.
it's really taught me and shown me how to just view what childhood can be from a completely different perspective, and as long as he's happy, I think that's the bottom line
Yes.
for right now. So if he doesn't have, the swimming classes to get enrolled in or the play group, where I can hang out with other Black mothers or whatever, these are the things I think that, I'm missing out on. If he, he's okay and he's fine. I mean, he has a healthy home, and two loving parents, and
Yes.
he, when we do travel to my in-laws, my husband's parents, they live in a very rural village about 6 hours north of where we live.
Mm.
And that's an awesome, really one of a kind experience that I definitely did not grow up having, like, so he has a great balance, you know what I mean? Like he
Yes.
gets to experience the village life of Namibia and retain, and really learn about his father's culture. And then,
Yes.
we also traveled to New York, to visit like, my dad and things like that. So, I've really had to think a lot and just, like reshape just all of my expectations for what, I always grew up thinking parenthood, would be like for me, like
Yes.
and at the end of it, like, although I found like, this small townness, and the lack of quote unquote things to do, to be frustrating, it's definitely been a bit like, I can tell it's taken time, but I've recognized that it's been, personally a good, sort of, soul shaping experience for me as
Yeah.
well. And just life is not necessarily meant to be easy. And there's more to life than, what the big cities have to offer. And so, it's
Absolutely.
been, yeah, so it's been a very interesting, almost 2 years of parenthood in this town and things like that, and it's gotten easier. I think the more that I accept it, it's I've come over a bit of a hump,
Yeah.
and so it's really I've kind of done like not a total 360, but I've really learned to look at things from a bit of a more a brighter perspective.
And your
So
son
yeah,
will continue to help you with that because the
right,
more vocal he becomes, the more you get to
right,
learn him as well, the
mm,
more that it will be so much less about what you think you need to be doing or not doing for him,
right,
and
right,
more so
right,
just facilitating what he's showing you that he's
right. That's
interested
true.
in. And that's one of the
Hmm.
beautiful things about embracing this idea of not needing it to be packaged a certain way. And very
Right,
soon, I mean,
right,
I'm like
right.
nodding like crazy because some of the parts of Jamaica that we stayed in, we did Kingston the first couple of years, and then it just got so expensive that we were in
Mm,
smaller towns, and we were
right,
coming
right,
from Atlanta where the girls were in dance and gymnastics and karate,
right.
and I was like, oh
Exactly.
my God, this is so lame. Like I couldn't,
Right.
I was like, what are they gonna do? But they were
Right.
fine. They liked going
Right.
outside. They liked the accents of the kids. They liked that they
Mm,
could pick a mango off the
mm,
tree. Just these small
mm.
things that I was just
Exactly.
like, yo, calm down, son. Like this is my
Right. Right.
stuff. And so much of parenting is like
Right.
your stuff. And they,
Right.
and then
Right.
too, even thinking about how present you get to be for your son and your
That's
husband.
so true.
Like if you're
Exactly.
getting dropped off at all these things all the time, so many people
That's
that
true.
I know talk about that as adults, how they are
Yeah.
just getting to know their parent now, or they
Right.
didn't at all
Right.
because their
That's
parent
true.
passed before. So he has you now. He has
Yeah.
you
That's exactly
Tuesday at 10:30.
right.
Like that alone.
Right. That's true. That's
Yeah,
so true.
yeah. But I
Yeah.
hear
Exactly.
you. Go through your process. It is what it is. And I think it's important to not feel crazy for any of the feelings. I
Right.
think that's normal, and it's all coming from a space of wanting like the best for your
Right.
child. So, but it's
Right.
just to
Right.
be really present to say, you know what? I'm observing
Mm-hmm.
him. Is he happy?
Exactly.
Is he
Exactly.
engaged? Does he seem like he's
Exactly.
thriving? So, yeah. So, I love
Right.
that you were able to just so early on in his journey to be present with that and to say, you know what? He seems
Right.
okay. And maybe that's pretty
Right.
relevant. I love that.
Right, right. It's true. It's very true. And thank you for all of that. I mean, this is my first time chatting with you, but I really respect like your platforms and
Thank
your
you.
voice and just everything. Like, so just to have this conversation with you, like, it's really helpful to me and very insightful and
Good.
very eye-opening. Like hearing it from, like another parent, of course, and I just Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. So Kaylin Reed Shapanga. Did I say your last name right? Is it Shapanga?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Perfect.
Kaylin Reed Shapanga, thank you so much for being here with us on Fear of the Free Child podcast. You guys, the show notes page is going to be akilahsrichards.com/Kaylin. Kaylan, really easy, Kaylan. And I will put the link to her blog and a couple of specific blog posts, especially that one about Black businesses in Namibia. And we'll stay in touch. Thank you, Kaylin.
Definitely. Okay. Thank you so much, Akilah.
You're very welcome. All right,
Thanks for listening to Fair of the Free Child podcast. Like the show? Then show your love or give your feedback at akilahsrichards.com.